baby! Push! Ah! I cannot do this anymore!
Great gods of our land, for 15 years I have waited. I have searched, sacrificed. Have mercy on me. Give me a son to carry my name, a son who will one day sit upon the throne of Umuafo. You have finally heard me. The gods have finally... Do I hear the cry of a second baby? No! Why, great gods of our land? Why must you punish me with twins after waiting for 15 years?
In Umuafo, the birth of twins was not considered a blessing. It was considered an abomination. The people believed that twins were unnatural, children connected to evil spirits, a terrible sign capable of bringing the wrath of the gods upon the entire kingdom. And according to the ancient law of Umuafo, both children must be thrown into the evil forest. For 15 years, King Ezechukwu had begged the gods for a child. Now the gods had finally answered him, but with twins. If he obeyed the law of Umuafo, he would lose both sons. But if he defied the ancient tradition to protect his sons, he might bring the wrath of the gods upon every soul in his kingdom. And so, before dawn, the king of Umuafo would be forced to make a decision that would change the fate of his family forever. For 15 years, the palace of Umuafo had waited for a night like this one. 15 years since King Ezechukwu took Adanma's hand in marriage before the whole kingdom and promised them sons who would carry his name forward. It has been 15 years now, and the sons were yet to come. He had watched other men lift their sons onto their shoulders at the New Yam festival, while he stood among his chiefs with a borrowed smile. Adanma bore the pain the most. Whispers followed her to the stream, to the shrine, to her own mother's compound, some blaming her and calling her barren, others blaming a throne the gods had simply chosen not to bless. She stopped attending certain festivals altogether because she was tired of smiling through the ache of it. In private, the king and queen carried the grief together. They had gone to every diviner within a day's walk from Umuafo. And when none of them could loosen whatever knot bound her womb, they went further still, crossing rivers to medicine men whose names were spoken only in whispers, carrying kola nuts and white cloth and unblemished goats to shrines in villages neither of them had ever seen before, pouring libations in sacred groves to powerful deities. Each herbalist always promised something different, yet every season ended the same way: no child. By the 15th year, King Ezechukwu had almost stopped hoping. Almost, because a man cannot fully stop hoping for the one thing his whole kingdom is still waiting to see him hold. But on the 16th year, the gods finally decided to open the queen's womb, and she took in. Then, on a night thick with the smell of rain not yet fallen, the queen's labor began. Ezechukwu did not sleep. He stood outside the birthing hut long after the moon had climbed past the palm crowns, listening to his wife's voice rise and fall behind the wall, praying to every god who had ever ignored him before, that tonight, for the successful delivery of the baby. Then came a sharp cry from the hut, and the king was on his feet before he even realized that he had moved. But then he heard a second cry from the hut, and he went still immediately, one hand braced against the door frame. The midwife did not step outside to announce anything to anyone. She just opened the door wide enough to find the king's eyes in the dark, and with one finger pressed to her lips, She beckoned him closer. "My king." Her voice was barely a breath meant for him alone. "Come, come and see, but come quietly." He stepped inside, and she closed the door shut behind him. Adanma sat propped against the wall, her wrapper damp with sweat, a son cradled in each arm. Her face held two things at once, a joy so raw it looked almost like pain, and beneath it, a fear she had not yet found words for. The queen had given birth to two sons. Ezechukwu did not need anyone to explain what that meant. He had grown up on the same stories every child in Umuafo grew up on, stories told in lowered voices that always ended the same way. In their tradition, twins were not children. Twins were a wound torn into the order of things, a proof that some restless spirit had slipped into the world through a door meant to open only once. If they were allowed to live, the whole land would suffer for it. Poisoned rivers, barren farms, a hunger that would not care whose fault it was. So, the tradition demanded that both babies would be thrown into the evil forest, where they would be devoured by wild animals. That was the only way to avert the calamities that could befall the kingdom. He crossed the room slowly, as though the floor might give way beneath him, and knelt beside his wife. He looked at the two small faces, one already asleep, fist curled against his own cheek, the other awake, eyes dark and unfocused, searching for something to fix on. 15 years of barrenness and pain, and this was what the gods had finally given him. 2 miracles, and a tradition demanding he destroy them both. "They are not a curse," Adanma said before he had spoken a word. Her voice cracked down the middle. "Tell me you see that. Tell me you will not let them." "I know what they are," he said quietly. "I know what our tradition believes they are. Both things are true at once, and I do not yet know which one I can survive." He knelt there a long while, saying nothing more, while his wife wept without sound into the crown of her firstborn's head. There was no elder to send for, no priest he dared bring near this room. The moment one more pair of eyes fell on these children, the secret would stop being his to keep. It would belong to the whole compound by morning, and to the whole kingdom by nightfall. If the priests came for both sons in daylight, he would either watch them taken or refuse them in front of every soul Umuafo trusted to keep it safe from ruin. Either road ended with his sons dead, or his throne burning beneath him, perhaps both. He knew he could not save the twins in the open, but before the sun rose high enough to make a liar of him either way, he might still save one in secret. He turned to the midwife. Before the first light of dawn, he said, "One child must leave this room. 3 guards will go with you, with enough food and water for many days on the road. No one else is to know what left this room. Not the servant girls at the well, not the guards at the gate. No one. Where should we go, my king? Far from here, far enough that no one there has ever once heard the word twins spoken about this house." He took out the ivory pendant from beneath his own rubber, the mark of his fathers, carried by every child of his lineage since the kingdom's founding, and pressed it into her palm. "Keep this with him. If a day ever comes when the truth must be told, let this speak first." Before the midwife wrapped the second child for the road, Adanma asked for one last moment. She held him against her chest without moving, memorizing the small weight of him, the sound of his breath, the way his fingers opened and closed around nothing at all. She pressed her mouth to the crown of his head and said nothing, because there was nothing to say to a child too young to understand goodbye, and far too soon to be leaving her arms forever. Then she let the midwife take him. She did not cry until the door had closed. They left while the rest of the compound still slept, slipping out through a rear gate reserved for the king's most private errands. The midwife carried the child wrapped tight and silent against her chest, sitting tight on a white horse. 3 guards on horsebacks moved around her without torches, trusting the last of the moon to light the path until the forest swallowed even that. The forest at night did not forgive carelessness. The guards knew this, and still they rode faster than caution allowed, eager to put distance between themselves and anything that might be watching from the dark. An owl's cry, too close, stopped them for a moment. Somewhere off the path, a branch cracked under a weight none of them could see. The lead guard raised a hand for silence, and for a long moment nothing moved at all. Not the wind, not the midwife's breath, not even the child, who seemed in that terrible quiet to understand that he must not cry. Then the quiet broke apart,
It is an ambush!
and they came from both sides of the path at
Protect the
once.
escort!
Fierce men who knew this forest better than any traveler could. They were thieves who lived by what they could strip from those passing through it. The first guard fell before his spear had cleared its sling. The second turned and brought the midwife 3 running steps into the trees before a blade found him too. The 4th guard held the longest, long enough for the midwife to press the baby low into a tangle of brush and cover him with her own body, whispering something that was not quite a lullaby and not quite a prayer. It was not enough. When the last guard had fallen, one of the attackers found her and found the child beneath her. He lifted the crying baby by the wrapper, his blade still wet in his other hand, close enough to finishing what the night had already started. Then he looked at the baby, really looked. The child was so small, so helpless. Even a man who had killed twice already that night could hesitate. He did not finish it. He threw the baby into the bushes at the edge of the path, gathered what little the guards and midwife had carried together with their horses, and vanished into the trees with the others, leaving nothing that could name what had happened there. The baby lay where he had landed, crying into a forest that gave no answer. Far beyond that stretch of road, in a village the palace had never had reason to name, a hunter named Ogbonaya sat awake beside a dying fire. He and his wife, Nneoma, had been married many harvests without a child between them. She had long since spoken of it aloud, though he still caught her watching other women's babies with a hunger she thought she hid well. Something pulled him from sleep before the birds had started, out along the bush path he used for his traps. As he was hunting in the bush, he heard the crying before he saw the child. He stood over the baby for a long moment, torch raised, his heart beating harder than any leopard had ever made it beat. Then he bent down and lifted the boy into his arms. "Nneoma," his voice shook when he reached the hut. "Come and see what the gods have left at my feet." She looked once at the baby's face and wept before he had finished the sentence. They never learned his name. They never learned whose blood he carried. They only knew that a child had been placed into their empty arms by the gods, and neither of them was foolish enough to question a gift like that. They named him Chidiebere. God has shown mercy. Days later, word reached the palace, carried the way such news always travels, from one traveler's mouth to the next, that a party had been attacked on the forest road, 3 guards and a woman, robbed and left where they fell. No one connected it to the king. No one could. As far as Umuafo knew, nothing had left the palace that night worth losing. Only King Ezechukwu understood what the news truly meant. He could not send soldiers to search a road for a child the kingdom did not know existed. He could not ask a single question without answering 10 others he had no intention of answering. To search for his son in the open would be to confess at last the very secret he had risked everything to keep. So he did the only thing left to him. He mourned where no one could see him do it. That night, he found Adanma in their chamber, their surviving son asleep against her shoulder, the small oil lamp throwing more shadow than light across her face. He did not need to say it. She read it in the way he stood in the doorway, unable to cross the room. "He's gone," she whispered. Ezechukwu said nothing. He crossed to her at last and sat by her side, and for a long while neither of them spoke. Only the soft breath of the son they still had, and the silence of the one they believed the forest had already taken. In the palace, a prince began to grow, wrapped in fine cloth, fed by servants' hands, taught from his first memory that he was the only son Umuafo's king had ever had. Meanwhile, in a hunter's hut at the edge of the forest, another boy began to grow, wrapped in whatever cloth his mother could spare, fed by a hunter's modest skills, taught that his life was a gift the gods had chosen to hand to a childless couple. Neither boy knew the other existed. Their father believed he had buried one son somewhere along a nameless stretch of road. He did not know that far beyond the trees, that same son was already learning to stand on legs that would one day carry him back toward the very palace his father would never let him call home. Two boys, one blood, two entirely different lives, and somewhere in the years ahead, fate was preparing to walk them back toward each other, closer with every season neither of them would ever see coming.